Coming up on The World Today, China rejects another probe into the origins of the coronavirus. Rescue operations are still ongoing in China following the devastating floods in Guinean province. Plus, Norway marks 10 years since Anders Breivik killed 77 people in the country. Well, welcome to the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. We begin with China rejecting the next stage of a World Health Organization plan to investigate the origins of the coronavirus pandemic. The WHO wants to audit laboratories in the area. The virus was first identified, but the Deputy Health Minister in China says this shows disrespect for common sense and arrogance towards science. The WHO experts say it is very unlikely the virus escaped from a Chinese lab, but the theory has endured. Investigators were able to visit Wuhan, the city where the virus was first detected in December 2019, in January this year. But earlier this month, the WHO head, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, outlined the terms of the inquiry's next phase, which included looking at certain science research institutions. He's now called on China to be more cooperative about the early stages of the outbreak. Now, about a lab outbreak, the biosafety level 4 laboratory of the Wuhan Institute of Virology has never had any leakage accident, says its expert, when refuted the conspiracy theory that the novel coronavirus was leaked from the lab. During a press briefing on tracing the origin of the novel coronavirus, Wan Ziming, who's director of the Wuhan National Biosafety Laboratory and researcher of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, says it is common knowledge that the virus originates from nature. He says the lab in Wuhan is just as safe as other P4 labs in the world and has never had any leakage. The expert also rebutted previous false reports on 3 researchers of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The Olympics have already begun, but the opening ceremony is tomorrow. Show director has been dismissed just one day to the events. Kentaro Kobayashi from the 1990s recently emerged in this is because, beg your pardon, of comments made by Kentaro Kobayashi in a 1990s recently emerged video in which he appeared to be making jokes about the Holocaust. Japan's Olympic chief Seiko Hashimoto says the video ridiculed painful facts about history. The dismissal is the latest in a string of scandals to hit the Games. Tokyo 2020, which was postponed last year because of the COVID-19 pandemic, has constantly threatened to derail the event, which has seen 3 men forced to step down since the start of 2021. All eyes are now turned to the Olympics from the ending of this week. Tomorrow is the opening ceremony, as we said earlier. Tokyo has recorded its highest number, however, of new COVID-19 infections for 6 months. The country confirmed 1,979 cases. The host city of the Olympics remains under a state of emergency, which will last throughout the Games, and city residents have been asked not to gather in the streets to watch the Olympic events, while restaurants have been banned from selling alcohol and have been ordered to stay closed and close early. Here's a global update.
Olympic organizers in Japan say about 950 people, including officials and journalists, will watch Friday's opening ceremony of the Olympics at the main stadium from which spectators have been banned. In addition to the group would be performers and athletes in the Games. When asked about the tally of 87 COVID infections among athletes, officials, and journalists, the organizers say completely getting rid of the virus is extremely difficult, making it important to quickly identify and tackle any new case. An infectious disease expert in Brazil say an accelerated COVID-19 vaccination rollout is crucial in preventing the spread of the Delta variant and other possible coronavirus variants in the country. Brazil reported the first case of the Delta variant near the end of June, with the same variant reported in several states in ensuing days. The National Laboratory of Scientific Computing of the Ministry of Science and Technology started to analyze various samples, which were randomly collected from all over the country every 2 weeks since March of this year. The Italian government is announcing limited restrictions for people who have not been vaccinated, including barring them from being served in indoor restaurants or from entering nightclubs, gyms, and sports stadia. It's also considering limiting access to trains and domestic flights. A so-called green pass showing proof of vaccination or a negative coronavirus test would be required. Finally, U.S. infectious disease expert Anthony Fauci says the Delta variant of the coronavirus is the cause of more than 80% of new U.S. COVID-19 cases, but the authorized vaccines remain more than 90% effective in preventing hospitalizations and deaths. The more contagious Delta variant was first found in India earlier this year. It has since become the dominant version of the virus in the United States and many other countries. It's detected in more than 90 nations nationwide. The U.S. Center for Disease Control says deaths from COVID-19 in the United States have averaged 239 per day over the past week, nearly 48% higher than the previous week.
Passengers trapped in China's busy subway stations on Tuesday have been narrating their ordeal as floodwaters gushed in one of the worst flooding the country has ever experienced. In one train carriage, water seeped in and rose from ankle to waist to neck height as panicked commuters stretched upwards to breathe. Others lifted shorter people into the shrinking air pockets above. Hundreds of people were eventually saved from the flooded subway tunnel in Zhengzhou, a city of 12 million people that sits on the banks of the Yellow River in the central Guinean province.
Tuesday was a horrific day for many out in public and private transportation in China's Henan province. Several passengers were trapped in a flooded subway carriage after a heavy rainfall. Tens of thousands of people were evacuated from flood-hit regions as officials announced rising death tolls. The fatal flooding of the subway prompted the government to order local authorities to immediately transit flood controls and emergency responses. News footage released on Chinese media showed rescuers carrying children and guiding elderly to safety amid flood-stricken passageways and homes in Yayang. More cities have been inundated and crops destroyed as the severe weather spread northwards, with the official news agency reporting direct economic losses of 1.22 billion yuan. Rescue teams used rubber raft to ferry residents to safety, while others waded through the water, carrying belongings above their heads or waited on half-submerged cars to be picked up. The skies have cleared, but flood waters are still at waist height or higher, with entire streets underwater in many areas. The death toll has been put at 33 for now, but 8 people at least are still missing.
Well, there's been crazy weather all the way up from this year. The start of the year, we've seen hurricanes, we've seen violent storms, we've seen tornadoes, we've seen floods now in China. And of course, the floods that ravaged through Germany last week. Joining us now is activist and environmentalist Olumide Idowu, who's here in Lagos. Olumide, thank you for joining us on The World Today. We've already identified climate change as the reason behind the crazy weather experienced since the start of the year. And we also talked about the mitigations. What impact do these weather changes have on the environment, particularly the floods that are being seen and experienced in China and in Germany, and even here in Nigeria?
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Actually, what we've seen presently is that the flooding issue has started causing a lot of problems. And like you said, we already know that is the issue related to climate change. But on the environment and what has happened in China and other countries that the flooding has been coming up for the past days, we can see that this has caused a lot of wildlife habitats and can destroy by flood waters. And that's what we are seeing in some countries now. And we can see that there's a lot of river that have been widening and deposition it's going to increase a lot of downstream. So livelihood has been taken away because those are the environment space that we are looking at. How can we make sure that we keep these people in a safer space? Plants that survived the initial flood some times ago may even die due to being undented water that we are seeing and the flood we see consistently now. So it's high time for us to start looking at what are the impacts of flooding on the environment and how can we make sure that we put measures to make sure that this thing doesn't really happen. So preparedness, how do we prepare for this certain or this condition that we are seeing ourselves? So it's very, very important that we start talking about how we can restore our environment and how we can make sure that we create a safe space, not only for the elite, but for the people that are living close to the coast river. Thank you.
For the floods. And here in Nigeria, NIMET has already predicted that there will be more rainfall, particularly in the month of September. So how do we prepare for that?
Yeah, thank you very much. NIMET, I am very sure that NIMET keep giving us this update every year. And for them to give us this year's own, I think one of the major key things that we need to do individually, we need to start preparing for the raining days. For instance, if I can make sure that I clean my drainage, then my neighbor do so, then each and every one of us, we actually be, free from this kind of flood. And one thing again, the government need to start looking at the measure they can put in place, because I'm particularly about the people that are living closer to the riverine, people living close to the ocean. What is going to be their own preparation? How do they need to prepare? Do they need to take them away from the riverside? But as an individual, as a Nigerian, we need to start looking inwardly. Don't need to wait for the government in this instance. So we need to start making sure that we clean our drainages, waste issue in our that we flood a lot of waste across different buildings, across different houses. We need to start clearing those drainages very fast. And that is one of the key things we need to do, because disaster doesn't wait for anyone. It comes like a thief in the night. Thank you.
Those buildings come apart. If you watch the videos from Germany, as the floodwaters ravaged through cities and through towns, it also damaged a lot of buildings. A lot of buildings collapsed, and as you rightly mentioned, rivers overflowed their banks. But this fight against this battle with nature, because we do have to live with it, is it a war that can be won?
Yeah, it's very possible. It's a race that we can win. Climate crises have started for some years. Let me say, since I've been attending the Conference of Party, we've been talking about climate issue. So climate change has really, really, caused a lot of havoc for a lot of people. And for those that do not believe climate change, I think this is the high time for us to start getting into our senses that a lot of people are dying. We've seen floods. A lot of people are dying. We've seen the waste issues. So this climate crisis is a race we can all win together. If we come together to make sure that we start looking at those areas that we can stop gas flaring, we can dispose our waste responsibly, and we can start looking at how we can move from fossil fuel to energy. So we start talking about energy democracy. So for us to win the crisis, we need to come together and work as one. Thank you.
Olumide Idowu, thank you again for speaking with us on The World Today.
Thank you.
We have more stories coming up on The World Today. Plus, the UK sanctions the individual who spent, guess how much, $275,000 on a Michael Jackson glove. Find out why. Welcome back to The World Today. The world has been battling a coronavirus pandemic reaching more than 100 countries. There's another health concern now, this time in the United States, where officials say that at least 200 people in 27 states in the country are being tracked for possible rare monkeypox infections. And they fear people may have come into contact with a Texas man who brought the disease in from Nigeria earlier this month. The man, believed to be the first monkeypox case in the U.S. since 2003, was taken to hospital but is in stable condition. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says it is concerned that passengers who were on board 2 flights the man made may have been exposed to the disease. They say he flew into Atlanta, Georgia from Lagos, Nigeria on July 9th before taking a flight to Dallas where he was hospitalized. It is said that it is working with airlines to assess potential risks to those who may have had close contact with the traveler. Britain has sanctioned the son of Equatorial Guinea's president for misappropriating millions of dollars, which London said was spent on luxury mansions, private jets, and $275,000 glove worn by Michael Jackson. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said Teodoro Obiang Mangue, who is also vice president of Equatorial Guinea, had participated in corrupt contracting arrangements and soliciting bribes to fund a lavish lifestyle inconsistent with his official salary as a government minister. The Equatorial Guinea government did not immediately respond to a request for comment when asked. Britain said Obiang had bought a $100 million mansion in Paris, a $38 million private jet, a luxury yacht, and dozens of luxury vehicles, including Ferraris, Bentleys, and Aston Martins. The Foreign Ministry says he also bought a collection of Michael Jackson memorabilia, including a $275,000 crystal-covered glove that Jackson wore on his bad tour. It's been 10 years since anti-immigrant extremist Anders Behring Breivik killed 77 people in Norway. The country remembers today. Breivik detonated a car bomb outside the Prime Minister's office in Oslo, killing 8 people before arriving to Utøya Island and shooting 69 people dead at a Labour Party youth camp on July 22, 2011. The country held a ceremony today in Utøya where survivors and relatives of victims observed a minute's silence. This morning, Prime Minister Erna Solberg addressed a memorial service attended by survivors and relatives of the victims, political leaders, and Norway's Crown Prince and Crown Princess. Rock climbing falls behind wrestling, football and surfing as well-loved pastimes in Senegal, but it has bound together a small community of locals and expatriates who say that their sport is under threat. We follow a crew of Senegalese climbers who are still fascinated by the sport.
Dangling from Umber Cliffs that tower over Africa's westmost shoreline, a crew of Senegalese climbers hunt for footholds that they say are vanishing. Rock climbing has bound together this small community of locals, and many say the sport is under threat. Bits of hard cliff are quickly turning into slopes of scree. Footholds and places to latch a rope are being lost.
It's kind of sad due to the fact that it's really a place where you can get all the stress from Dakar, all the noises and everything. When you come over here, it's quiet, you get the nature around, and if things are getting built all over the place, well, that is definitely not going to be positive for the nature as well.
Senegalese people, they like stuff.
Waiting at the summit after each climb is no longer a clean park, with a pleasant view of Dakar's lighthouse that for 150 years has kept ships away from the reef below. These days is a dusty construction site littered with medical waste from a nearby hospital.
When we think about this small scene of climbers, let's say Senegalese climbers that are really starting to get involved into this beautiful sport, and at the same time we have the construction going on, which will automatically kind of restrict us from climbing. It's very, very, very sad. I mean, this is a beautiful spot to climb, and the opportunity also for Senegalese climbers to be seen also on the international scene is definitely not going to happen if we don't have access to this climbing spot.
Erosion costs Senegal's government more than $537 million per year, especially due to loss of high-value urban land, according to a 2019 World Bank study. That's more than double what Benin loses, despite its having the region's worst coastal erosion in terms of land volume lost. This geologist, who heads Senegal's National Scientific Research Institute, worries that if something isn't done, and soon too, the cliffs and the lighthouse may crumble into the sea.
Et les mamelles aussi, c'est le vestige, c'est ce qui reste comme histoire du volcan des mamelles.
Mamelles cliffs are what remains. The volcanic history of Mamelles is geological history of Senegal, so to protect it is already very urgent. Because if we don't, in a few years' time, the lighthouse will fall. You see all the rocks behind us? The lighthouse is not far behind. So we need to protect Mamelles urgently because it's historical, touristic, ecological, and strategic.
Look at this, how amazing it is to be able to be here with our friends, to enjoy every time here. But I think we are happy to be here, and it would be very precious to give it better than we find it to our children. And this is my main goal, to protect this area for the coming generation.
But some magic remains. One recent evening, climbers found an injured hawk nestled into the cliffside. Unable to fly, they took the bird in, and 2 weeks later, it's flying again in the skies.
You've been watching The World Today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.